Well, greetings, imagination connoisseurs. It is I, the sanctimoniously notorious RMB, here on a Sunday. Boy, this is going to be a barn burner of a show. Let me tell you, there's all kinds of craziness happening in the world, all kinds of craziness. First of all, I want to welcome all of you imagination connoisseurs to this, the Post-Geek Singularity community, the most hospitable fan community on the web, thanks to you and our moderators. So it's happy to have you here on a Sunday. Everything is going to be fun today, I think. We have a new letter from Willow Yang. Yes, Willow Yang reviewed The Trouble with Tribbles. I've been waiting for this one, and you will all enjoy it. Anyway, as all of you know, this chapter is sponsored by Lucky Tiger Men's grooming products for those men who want to look good and feel great. If you go to their website at getluckytiger.com, you can punch in PGS for Post-Geek Singularity community, and you get 20% off your order. I'm sorry, I still have, truth be told, I was eating pistachios before I came on, and they're quite good. For those of you who are interested, I'm a pistachio, cashew, and almond guy. Not necessarily in that order, but those are my favorite nuts. Anyway, I can't not address what just happened. Well, maybe not just happened because there's a time difference. For those of you who may or may not have heard, various British tabloids, mostly which have dubious track records, are reporting that in our upcoming beloved Bond 25, which we are all going to go see in London at the Odeon Cinema in Leicester Square when it opens on opening day at the first show, all of you members of the Post-Geek Singularity community, are invited. Supposedly that will be on April 3rd of 2020. Details are forthcoming. But today, various dubious tabloids in the UK are reporting that there is a new 007. That's right, a new 007, not a new James Bond, a new 007 in the upcoming Bond 25. And they are reporting that British actress Lashana Lynch, who you might remember from Captain Marvel as Carol Danvers' friend, and who, maybe should have been the first Captain Marvel if you know your comic book lore, that Lashana Lynch is playing the new 007 in the movie. As has been reported, Bond is apparently retired. So I don't know about you, but it makes sense to me that if a 00 doesn't die in the line of duty, they retire, and their 00 license then becomes up for grabs. So the fact that a black woman is the new 007 doesn't bother me in the least. As a matter of fact, I find it interesting. If Bond doesn't wind up teaming up with her in the movie, which I think would actually be cool, she probably dies, which is one of the reasons that Bond goes after Rami Malek in the film. But I don't know. I don't know what's happening in the movie. I have no knowledge of the plot, but everyone's going bananas. Predictably, there's a lot of racist tweets out there. People are bitching and moaning and complaining in England. And, I find this predictable and sad, but also really stupid. One of my favorite shows of the noughties was a British show that in Britain was called Spooks, but over here it was called MI5. It ran for 10 seasons. If you haven't seen the show MI5 or Spooks, there was even a movie. There was a film version that was released here as MI5. It's one of my favorite shows, and it's presumably, as you might guess, it's about MI5, which is Britain's internal security service. MI6 is external. MI5 is the equivalent of our FBI. MI6 is the equivalent of the CIA, basically. But MI5 is one of the great TV shows ever. And one of the great staples of MI5 was that they killed people. They killed the principal characters season after season in gruesome and shocking ways. And I remember watching the first season of that show, and I was blown away that they murdered one of the main characters in like episode 4 in a hideously gruesome manner. And I was shocked. And it basically, they said, look, no one is safe on the show. And indeed, no one was. I have always enjoyed it when they change things up and take our principal characters off the playing field for a while and replace them with new people, and you see how that goes. I first noticed this in, of course, a show called Wise Guy that I was a huge fan of. They did it a number of times. Even the fourth season, they replaced Ken Wall as Vinny Terranova, and they replaced him with Stephen Bauer. I loved the two-part Star Trek The Next Generation episode, Chain of Command, when Picard was replaced with Captain Jellicoe. I liked it when the lovely Agent Reyes and John Doggett replaced Fox, Mulder, and Dana Scully in The X-Files, because it's, to me, it gives it a freshness, a new perspective. I think it's really interesting. I think Lashana Lynch I really enjoy her as a screen presence. I think it's pretty cool that they brought her in, and I'm always a fan of movies like Atomic Blonde or La Femme Nikita or any movie where female agents kick ass. Find those incredibly enjoyable. So the outcry that a black woman is the new 007 is presumably going to be with us for the next, I don't know, however long this ridiculous thing is going to burn, where all the racist, misogynist assholes come out of the closet and complain, which is pretty stupid. Because the whole point of the movie is that Daniel Craig is retired. Bond is retired, which means, hey, he's no longer a 00, I would imagine. And that's part of the plot. And that actually furthers, in my mind, the 00 canonical mythology in the films, which is interesting. I want to see how they handle it. I hear they're doing something interesting. I would imagine that if they don't team up, then she probably dies in the pre-title sequence. We've seen 00s die in pre-title sequences before. So I say bring it on. I'm very excited. It just makes me that much more excited about Bond 25. Really interested to see which direction they're taking the franchise in, and I think it's very cool. What do you guys think? If you're going to be racist, misogynist douchebags, well, I don't care what you have to say then. I appreciate cogent, interesting discourse. If you want to do an analysis about what this means to the over 50-year-old franchise, and if you go back into the books, even longer. So if you've got something interesting to say about it, I'm all ears. But if you want to bitch and moan and complain, I am not. I'm not all ears, because it's tired and predictable and boring, frankly. But interesting. It's interesting that that's what they're doing. Now, what I wanted to get into, first of all, I got a lot of letters. And for those of you who know, you can send me letters to my website, theburnettwork.net. There's a form, and I've been getting some great ones. And I've even got one today from Willow Yang. Yes, indeed. Willow Yang has written me a letter about, and she reviewed, God love Willow Yang, she reviewed The Trouble with Tribbles, the original Star Trek episode, The Trouble with Tribbles. I had no idea that was coming in over the transom, and it just delights me to no end when Willow Yang brings her writing prowess to bear on classic Star Trek episodes. It really makes my day. But before I get to the letters, I wanted to talk about a topic at hand, which I found interesting. Today on Deadline, Deadline.com is the industry, the entertainment industry. It's both a propagandistic site where you can promote your projects if you can know the right people at Deadline, and it also reports insider industry news. It's one of my go-to places. I look at it every day, usually multiple times a day. Today, they had a really interesting article. And the article, I'm going to read the headline: Counter-Programming Crawl and Stuber, Collateral Damage in Superhero Summer as Spider-Man climbs to 45 million plus. So I'm going to read a little bit of this article. Like we said last weekend in our Midsummer report, when smaller films like Paramount's Crawl, now estimated at a $12 million opening in third place after a $4.2 million Saturday, 3% down from Friday, and Fox's Stuber, still $8 million after a $2.9 million Saturday, down 6% from Friday, failed to pop. Much of that has to do with, one, what they are inherently as product, or two, a distribution. Wait a minute. I'm reading this badly. When Paramount's Crawl and Fox's Stuber failed to pop, much of that has to do with, one, what they are inherently as product, or two, a distribution marketing fumble. And yes, you still have behemoths like a Sony Marvel movie, such as Spider-Man Far From Home, and Disney's Toy Story 4 vacuuming up most of the dollars in a given weekend. respectively making $45.3 million and $20.7 million. We'll get into Crawl and Stuber's shortcomings further down, but there's chatter out there that the exhibition should break out of their old ways and start experimenting with prices for lower budgeted movies. In no way are audiences in an Avengers Endgame $851 million plus marketplace going to spend the same amount of money, $15 to $20 a ticket, to see smaller films like Midsummer, Crawl, Stuber, Long Shot, the list goes on. Such mid-budgeted and lower-budgeted fare should be designated at cinemas with lower prices. In order to pull this plan off, exhibition and distribution have to be in accord, the latter having a lot of say on film rental terms. If you want to see a clear example of how audiences come out to smaller movies at lower ticket prices, just glance at Tuesday's box office, when theaters around the country host bargain or $5 Tuesdays. Last week, Universal's working titles Yesterday saw a 55% gain over Monday's sales. Rocketman, a near 40% daily jump, and Annabelle Comes Home, a 41% surge. All of this said, if you had a piece of counter programming, this was the weekend to release it, given the breathing room in between Far From Home and the upcoming Lion King. But Paramount and Disney Fox didn't take full advantage of that opportunity. Paramount's Crawl, which played best in the South, delivering an estimated 44% of its gross despite Tropical Storm Barry in the Louisiana Gulf, had an awesome trailer out of CinemaCon. It's literally a never-before-seen, at least for younger audiences, Jaws-type movie with a great high-stakes premise. Alligators infesting an underwater house during Hurricane 5. Exhibitors and social media influencers screenings love the movie. So why isn't this the Meg? Something doesn't seem right here, and the movie feels like a missed opportunity. There was only one trailer released online, and it had a high viral rate at 67-1. But that's only because there was one trailer. Paramount included the trailer on such pictures as Dark Phoenix in theaters. Overall, it felt like Paramount really didn't eventize this movie like they did with Rocketman or even A Quiet Place. In fact, you could argue that A24's Midsummer had more of a digital presence. Each time you logged onto Facebook over the last 2 weeks, a trailer played. Digital Crawl ads seemed to appear just last week. Relish Mix says that the social media universe of Sam Raimi's production at 57 million is behind the horror average of 82 million. Crawl earned about 300 new Facebook fans on average daily, far shy of the genre's usual 1.7 thousand. Basically 1,700. Also, the movie's 13,000 average daily YouTube views are also behind the benchmark of 28,000. There were no advanced critic screenings. They're typically not fans of creature features. This despite the fact that the 56 film reviewers who ran out to see the croc exploitation film enjoyed it at 88% certified fresh on Rotten Tomatoes. Audiences were so-so with a B cinema score. Meg had a B+, and post-track lower at 2.5 stars and a 46% definite recommend. And then it goes on. Now, Stuber, another Fox orphan in the Disney gobble-up, R-rated action comedies aren't Disney's forte, so they let what was left of the Fox marketing department handle the heavy lifting here. Don't expect this to become a trend with Fox movies. We hear Disney loves Ford versus Ferrari, and they're aiming to make that work during awards season. Also, Ad Astra is a new Regency and Brad Pitt movie. Those two have a lot on the line with that sci-fi pick, so they're going to see that pick work. The creative campaign for Stuber, like Dark Phoenix, was uninspiring and mailed in, with the initial one-sheets showing a close-up of shot of stars Dave Bautista and Camille Nanjiani. Camille Nanjiani. How can I mispronounce the greatest X-Files fan in the world's name? I'm sorry, Camille. Also, a big factor missing. What the hell does Stuber mean? The campaign never really transmitted that. Nanjiani is a guy named Stu who drives an Uber. It would help to incorporate that. There was a premiere of Stuber at South by Southwest days before the Disney-Fox merger, but no, this movie wasn't Baby Driver. Stuber was one of the few Fox trailers included in Disney's CinemaCon presentation, along with Ford versus Ferrari and Dark Phoenix. So basically, both of these movies, both Stuber and Crawl, have failed at the box office. They're not burning up the charts. And by all accounts, I have not seen either one. So once again, I'm talking about two movies I haven't seen. But everybody I know who's seen Crawl loved it. It's a lean, mean 90 minutes. And people who saw Stuber that I know really enjoyed it as well. So why are they failing at the box office? Well, I have to tell you, I had never heard of Crawl before John Campy and I went to CinemaCon in Vegas. We're like looking at each other. Alexander Aja, who directed the remake of The Hills Have Eyes, a great horror director, I would say, always delivers the goods to a certain extent. And here's a film that was not on my radar at all, which is pretty shocking. Neither did John had heard of the film. And we're watching this. I'm like, wow, that looked really good. So this was just a few months ago. They put this movie out in the middle of the summer. Presumably it's a crowd pleaser, 88% fresh on Rotten Tomatoes, and it's not generating the kind of audiences that even are going to Conjuring universe movies. Who doesn't want to go see a alligator eating people movie? Well, I think what Deadline is saying, they're actually proposing a fairly radical idea that I think is quite a good idea. And that is, why are all movies created equal in terms of how much you're paying at the box office? Now, I understand when you're going to see a film, it requires the same seats, the same venue, the same projection. Everything is the same. The prices of refreshments are the same, which is where theater owners make most of their money. So it doesn't matter really. I mean, they're splitting, of course. When people go to the movies, it's basically, I don't know what the actual split is, but for the sake of argument, let's call it 50-50. You're paying for 50%, the theaters retain 50, and then 50 goes to the distributor. So if they were to change current box office to a tiered pricing system where event movies like a Toy Story or Avengers Endgame cost more money than smaller fare like Crawl or Stuber, I think that could be highly attractive to audiences. Because what's happened is movies are now, unless you're so inclined, unless you want to go to art house theaters, which presumably there aren't a lot of art house theaters through major Midwestern areas. We have art house theaters here in major metropolitan areas, but it's not exactly, you're not going to get a Lemley if you live in a smaller town. So if you're not used to going to art house fare, what you're doing, the entire movie going audience has now moved over to a mindset of going to the theater is an event. You're going to see an event movie, you're paying event prices, and it makes tremendous sense to me that people can go out and see smaller movies for a lesser amount of money, as evidenced by $5 Tuesdays as they're tracking at the box office. I think it's a tremendous idea that they should adapt, because our mindset about movie going is now, and I've watched this happen, that it's the event movies that get all the play, the summer movies, the movies that are water cooler movies that people are excited to see. And I think Crawl, if it had a long lead ad campaign, the same was true of Stuber. How long has it been since we had a crazy buddy comedy, mismatched buddy comedy? Kumail Nanjiani is coming off of The Big Sick. Everyone likes him. And Dave Bautista is having sort of a renaissance, but they can't quite make him work. He's got another movie coming out in a couple of months, which they actually moved to make way for Stuber. Everyone likes Dave Bautista, but, you know, like they said in this article, Stuber, Stu and Uber, that could have been a funny thing. That could have been a dumb catchphrase that we could have all known what it was, but nobody did know what it was. And I think both of the movies suffered from bad marketing campaigns. And like they pointed out, sure, one was the product of a Fox merger with Disney, but this is still product. And by all reports, the movies are pretty good. Crowd pleasers. You walked out of the film feeling satisfied, but you might not have walked out of the film feeling satisfied if you paid the same amount of money that you paid for Endgame or you paid for Toy Story 4, because those are big event movies. I think having a tiered system based on the perception of the film or based on what the movie is, maybe what it cost. I don't know how you would implement that. But what we want to do, what's most important, is to keep the theatrical experience alive. And faced with the technology that's available for home theaters, whether it's projectors or whether it's bigger 4K sets, even Netflix is broadcasting in 4K now. So we have to make kind of like what they did in the 50s to combat television. They adopted widescreen formats. You saw CinemaScope, everything from VistaVision, which is not a big widescreen format, to CinemaScope, which is a big widescreen format, or Super Panavision 70 or Cinerama. They made the theatrical film-going experience bigger and even more special in light of the onslaught from television. Well, now, as everyone's sort of moved over to streaming, and you can watch movies on every platform under the sun, whether it's your cell phone waiting for a bus or taking a drive somewhere with somebody, to where your computer, your laptop, wherever you are, the way to see movies now is ubiquitous. It's everywhere. You don't even have to be in your own home. You're carrying movies with you wherever you go. So they need to make the theatrical experience. I mean, they've tried that with, they've made theater seats that are controllable. You can order food. They've tried to do everything under the sun. But the one thing that is shown to absolutely work, which is make the price of going to the movies come down. And I think that it's unfortunate that movies that I would grow up with, I mean, when I was growing up, low budget films, I saw Phantasm in a movie theater. You know, I saw Halloween, which cost $300,000 in a movie theater. And then these movies were big. They were water cooler movies. You were not cool if you weren't going to the latest slasher movie when it opened. And we've seen that horror movies are doing well, especially if they're movies about ghosts, it appears. And I think, look, Crawl, aside from the title Crawl, which probably works well once you've seen the film, we've had so many of these B Sci-Fi Channel monster movies or movies about creatures that maybe a lot of people were turned off by this, but that's because no one had an awareness of it. The ferocity of the movie was not necessarily conveyed in the trailers. I mean, I think you were still smiling about the fact that, ooh, it's an alligator movie. So it's unfortunate when both a movie's marketing and then the ticket prices at movie theaters now both conspire to torpedo films, which are probably pretty good and worth seeing, that people are then waiting. I mean, a movie like Crawl, if it had become a blockbuster, what that would do is tell all the rest of the studios and all the rest of the indie distributors that, hey, this kind of creature feature horror still works at the cinema. Let's make more of it. So I never enjoy watching movies like this. And when I say fail, I don't mean creatively. I'm specifically talking about their box office. And it was in the summer movie season, it just didn't do well. But yes, you've still got Endgame in theaters. You still have Toy Story 4 in theaters. So I understand. It's hard to get people to come out. We got Lion King looming on the horizon. It opens in less than a week now. That's going to gobble up the box office. But it's unfortunate. I mean, studios have to start thinking about, along with their distribution partners, about putting out movies and making it a thing that these movies are not. Look, you got to figure out a way to say these movies are not necessarily lesser in terms of artistic quality, but there was a lot less risk in terms of how much they cost. But they still provide a theater-going experience. From what I hear about Crawl, it provides a great experience in the theater. If you see it with an audience, which is where it should be seen, you're going to have a lot of fun. And I think it's unfortunate that these movies are not being seen as much in the theaters as they should have been. And that is, to me, a bummer. Really, really bummed out by that. So that's kind of what I wanted to bring up first. I don't know what you guys think. How do you feel about that? Am I wrong? Am I right? What do you think? I don't know. Now, in order to further this discussion, I have a letter that I thought would be fine to kick off this chat. This letter comes from Ian Samuels. Ian says, Rob Meister General, I grew up in the 80s, and I was not only into sci-fi, but also horror. I feel that the 80s is a golden age of horror films. My introduction to horror was, like many, the Universal Monsters and Hammer horror. During the 80s heyday, there were great, many maligned, or at least underrated films. Some of my favorites were The Gate, Basket Case, Street Trash, Lair of the White Worm, which starred Hugh Grant and was based on a story written by Bram Stoker. Phantasm 1 and 2, Peter Jackson's Bad Taste, Creepshow, From Beyond, Videodrome, They Live, John Carpenter's The Thing and Prince of Darkness, An American Werewolf in London, Return of the Living Dead, Fright Night, The Fly, Reanimator, Evil Dead 1 and 2, We also got the beginnings of franchises, including Jason Voorhees and the Friday the 13th films. Admittedly, his mother was the killer in the first film. Hellraiser, Child's Play, and of course, Freddy Krueger in A Nightmare on Elm Street. Personally, I always preferred Jason over Freddy. What? I also got my introduction to Japanese horror with Tetsuo the Iron Man. What are your feelings on the horror genre in general? Do you agree that its heyday in the 80s, that its heyday was in the 80s? Are there any recent horror films you believe compete with 80s classics? I eventually gave in and watched Saw, but it felt high budget and almost like they were trying hard to emulate the gore horror of the 1970s and 80s. Ian. Well, first of all, Ian, what a great letter. Thank you. I am a fanatical horror film fan. I have been my whole life. As many people know, I produced a horror movie called The Hills Run Red, which is, I guess, available in HD on many different formats, including Vudu. Recently, I've been getting a lot of letters from people who watch The Hills Run Red for the first time, so thank you for that. Look, I think the 80s, what was really interesting about 80s horror was how diverse it was. You had the slasher genre that had begun in the 70s with Halloween, of course, maybe Texas Chainsaw, but Halloween was really Black Christmas and Halloween. I think of as the first modern slasher movies, really. And then, of course, we moved into the Friday the 13th films, which started in 1980. And then everything that Ian said is absolutely true. But I love the fact that, like, Evil Dead was sort of this hell's a poppin' demon possession story. And then you could go see Reanimator, which is kind of a cheeky H.P. Lovecraft story adaptation, which I loved, it was both humorous and hardcore. Return of the Living Dead was more humorous than anything. You, of course, had Romero's third Day of the Dead come out. I thought 80s horror was great because it was so diverse. David Cronenberg, of course, was continuing his body horror with things like Videodrome. But look at the difference between Videodrome and The Fly. And between those movies, we were, of course, able to get Cronenberg's adaptation of Dead Zone. And then we also were able to get things from John Carpenter. Between The Thing and Prince of Darkness, he directed the Stephen King adaptation, Christine. So the 80s was certainly a heady, frothy time to be a horror fan. There was incredible amounts of horror science fiction. I think the 80s was really a marvelous time for genre films in general. We had science fiction, of course, fantasy, and horror. It was great because it had proven its mettle at the box office, low-budget slasher movies, and we still had drive-in films back then. So you had, and as I talked about a lot, people were going to see, which feeds into this chat, people were going to see all kinds of movies at the multiplex. You had A-list studio pictures playing in multiplexes right next to American releases of movies like Lucio Fulci's The Beyond, which was released as Seven Doors of Death. Don't ever watch that version. It's hideous. But we got those kinds of things. I remember, I could go sneak into Dress to Kill. I could see Escape from New York. I could go see Somebody Killed Her Husband, which I actually saw at the John Dance Theater. Whatever happened to that movie? But there was just a lot of diversity at theaters, and horror and sci-fi, low-budget horror and sci-fi were making tons of money. Terminator would come out and make a ton of money. Even New Line would release movies like The Hidden, Jack Shoulder's The Hidden, which I loved. What a great creature feature. I mean, it's an action movie, an alien invasion science fiction thriller movie, and a buddy cop movie, all rolled into one. If you guys haven't seen Jack Shoulder's The Hidden, it's fantastic. I love it. It really holds up well. So anyway, Ian, I'm a huge horror fan. I always have been. But you asking the question, do I see today's horror is different? I don't see, I would call Nightmare on Elm Street fantastical horror. Hellraiser is certainly fantastical horror. There isn't a lot of, I guess all horrors when you're dealing with supernatural entities, or I guess it's all fantastical. But now a lot of the horror that's making money, the Conjuring universe, especially what James Wan did with Insidious and the Conjuring universe, and the Saw franchise. By the way, as I've said, I think Saw 1, 2, and 3 are all quite good. The first Saw was basically made for a little over $1 million. And to me, the first Saw is a great example of indie horror at its finest. I really liked the first Saw a lot. I was actually I was on location on that shoot at Lacey Street Studios. I shot some behind the scenes material for Lionsgate on that film. But I I'm a fan, but I don't think that we have the diversity in horror that we used to. A lot of it is like, although I don't know if that's right to say. Maybe I'm wrong. I mean, are there movies like those films coming out? I don't know. I would say that what's interesting is in the Friday the 13th and Nightmare on Elm Street movies, the characters are dispensable. It's Freddy and Jason that continue on from film to film. Everyone else seems to be cannon fodder. But what's kind of cool in movies today is that it's the human characters. The Warrens, for instance, from the Conjuring films, they're the ones that you follow through the movies. They're in, of course, Annabelle Comes Home. And I think that's interesting. And some of my favorite horror, I mean, that has come out, of course, I've talked about how much I love The Witch, on and on and on. And Ari Aster's, well, Midsummer's in theaters now, but Hereditary, Heredity. And I think that's an interesting film. I mean, we're still getting great horror. Of course, Jordan Peele with Get Out and Us. As much as I disliked Us, it is pretty fantastical and out there when you find out what's going on. So I think, I don't know. I mean, the 80s was a great time, and I lived through it. And, you could go see a werewolf movie, or you could go see Gremlins or a slasher movie. There was a lot of diversity in our horror films, and people were going to all of them, and it was great. I don't know if today is the same. I don't know if we look at horror films in the same way. Like, I wonder if movies like An American Werewolf in London would have caught on if it came out today. I mean, that was in 1981. So it's almost, that movie's almost 40 years old, and it's a classic. Certainly high watermark in John Landis's career as a director. I love that film, but I don't know if those days, if that kind of success can be duplicated, because what's amazing about American Werewolf in London is it works on so many different levels. It's a balls to the wall. There's a werewolf that will tear out your throat, but there's also a relationship between two best friends, one of which ends up dead in the movie, but still comes back, and their friendship is a key component. It's a romance. I mean, and there's fantasy dream sequences. You watch those kinds of movies, and I don't know if they're really making movies like they made back in the 80s. I think it's a different time. Horror is sort of more grounded now. I mean, remember Paranormal Activity was huge, and that was basically a movie about there really are monsters or ghosts in your closet. So it seems to me that the horror that we're getting now is much more grounded, I think, as far as ghosts can be grounded or cults can be grounded. I think the horror today is more grounded. There's less fantasy horror. But then I could be wrong. I'm just trying to think of movies that were coming out in the theater. The horror films that people are going to see in the theater seem to be more grounded, more filled with the everyday. Maybe that's not true, but convince me I'm wrong. But I think horror as a genre is alive and well, and I certainly love that is the case. So, Ian, thanks for writing that in. I really like that you wrote that in. This is a very funny letter that made me laugh from longtime Post-Geek Singularity member Orlando Logan Olivero. Olivero? It's however you pronounce your last name, Orlando. I love this letter. Howdy, Rob. Just checking in once again from the infernal Texas heat, sitting in my Skeletor underoos on a big block of ice. Got to type this fast as possible before it melts and I'm left with a frigid, bruised coccyx that shamefully trembles in pain and rage when the words Kurtzman are muttered. So I quickly wanted to comment on your show the other day where you responded to some Picard controversy. Let me start this off by saying that I initially found you on a group chat with Midnight's Edge. This year, I began listening more frequently to Midnight's Edge coverage on Star Trek Discovery and became engrossed with your particular conversation, which I found to be both astute and reasonable. However, I also became very much amused that you and I both share a certain passionate disdain and frustration toward the handling of the Star Trek property. Yes, many of us do. So in that conversation, I saw a little bit of the Rob Hulk rage, which in turn lured me into the Post-Geek Singularity. I've been enjoying my time here. Well, thank you for that. So on this recent show where you were discussing Picard, I could have sworn that I saw those gamma green eyes emerge once more. You were holding it in. I know it, man. I've begun to understand your sensibility a bit more with each Robservations episode, but I also notice you hold back that rage in such a respectful and professional manner. I applaud you because I, on the other hand, can be much more harsher, crass, and downright rude. Ask any of my coworkers. They'll all be seeking therapy once I'm done explaining to them how the book was better than the movie, or how they know absolutely nothing about the character since they've never picked up a single comic book in their life. So while listening to you on that particular episode, I admit that at times I grinned. Yes, the inner fire, the Rob Hulk rage, once again ignited. And like the Emperor, I caught myself gurgling out a creepy chuckle. Good, good. Let the hate flow through you, Rob Burnett. Of course, I exaggerate for the sake of humor and humoring myself, but the truth is, your inner rage is rather tame and controlled compared to the likes of the average supposed nerd culture YouTuber, the type that evokes artificial rage only for the sake of likes and subscriptions. Although, I have to say, I do like likes and subscriptions. They help my analytics. So please, if you like these chats, like and subscribe. The ones that parrot the collective discontent that could very well be manufactured. They become self-appointed lords of nerd culture, fandom, or whatever one wants to refer to it as. They repeat ridiculous catchphrases like, you done effed up. This is also a suitable means for training dogs, by the way. You, Rob, are different. You possess firsthand experience. Sorry, it's really hot in here because it's really hot outside too. You possess firsthand experience, authenticity as a fan, legitimate expertise and knowledge, and above all, passion. That is one of the many reasons that I admire what you're doing with the Post-Geek Singularity. I can explain it to people like this. When I have an electric problem, I call an electrician. When I want info on Star Trek, I will seek the wisdom of one such as Robert Meyer Burnett, rather than some sideways hat-wearing hack or some moderately attractive 21-year-old female spewing out pop culture bile that has been regurgitated and easily accessed thanks to the internet. I just would like to editorialize here that, you know, there are many 21-year-old females that spew out pop culture bile that I think are quite intelligent and worth watching. I can only hope that your concerns are heard by the current Trek administration, as I feel you speak for the true fandom. Also, don't ever let any of those imposterous thumbs down drag you down to a level of subhuman trolls and charlatans. You are no shill. You, my friend, are real and not a robot. You are alive like Johnny Five. But I admire your strength to hold back the inner Rob Hulk rage. Your positivity is profound, and your wrath is like that of a scarred and wizened warrior. Indeed, I dig the Burnett yin, and I dig the Burnett yang. I also like the Willow yang, for that matter. He did write that, Willow. You, sir, are like the great cosmic balance. I do relish the moments of true and passionate concern for the things we care for, and perhaps I'd like to see more of the Rob Hulk rage. So together, we shall sit. Together, we shall wait and see. When the time comes, we will defend our kingdom from being corrupted by the fakers, the bandwagon riders, and the co-opters of culture. We are, and always have been, in this for life. So rage on, Rob. Hugs and kisses to all, and I hope you get lucky, Tiger. Orlando Logan Olivero of Pteranodon Media. Well, Orlando, what a great letter. Clearly, you and I do park our shuttlecrafts in the same garage. Love to hear that from you. Thank you. That was a very funny letter. Let's see what anybody out there in the chat world is saying, because I see that people have said things. First of all, CJ Dunn is here. Oh, when can we expect Viewer's Choice? I'd love to chitty chat with you and see you chitty chat with other Post-Geek Singularity members. Cannot wait. I've been actually working on that. It's been a little delayed. I wanted to do that this weekend because I've got, I've been getting a couple. People have been sending them in. They're really good, but somebody sent me one. I don't have their name in front of me, but somebody sent me a potential viewer's chat, a viewer's choice about the Transformers movie, the animated film from the 80s. Terrific letter that very long, brought up many good points. I saw the Transformers movie once. I'm not a huge Transformers fan, but now based on this letter, I want to go back and watch it again. But I think want to do a chat about that, because I think the letter was really interesting. It wasn't just about Transformers, but it was about kids entertainment and how do we perceive kids entertainment. And I thought it was really good. Really good. So I'm working on that, CJ. Thank you for asking. Factual Opinion says, by the way, CJ, well, you know. Anyway, Factual Opinion says, in The Next Generation, why were Klingons changed but not Romulans? Well, they were actually. The Romulans were given heavier brows and they were all wearing the same clothes. But remember, The Next Generation Klingons were changed in Star Trek The Motion Picture. So they were in, and that came out in 79. Next Generation debuted in 87. So that new look for the Klingons, it was refined, certainly, for Next Gen, but they were building on the new mythology that was set up in Star Trek The Motion Picture. And, you know, with the bigger budget, they could make the Klingons look more alien. I didn't necessarily object to that. As a matter of fact, there was an explanation given early on about how those were the purebred Imperial Klingon race, and that as the Empire expanded and brought more life forms, more humanoid life forms into the Empire, that the Klingons were made up of many different races, which I thought made sense to me. And that's why we saw humanoid Klingons, because humanoid Klingons they could easily blend in with, at least that was an explanation I read early on, which I thought was cool. But the Romulans were introduced in TNG in the last episode of the first season, the Neutral Zone, and they had heavier brows and they did that to make them, I think, look more alien. One of the things they did was give them all those high shoulder pads. You know, I always thought it was strange. I got why they did this, but in Next Generation, they felt if everybody was kind of wearing the same kind of clothes, it would be easier to tell them apart. And I just thought that the Romulan outfits were a little impractical, but so they were changed a bit. Wade O'Neill says, by the way, Wade, thanks for the support on the channel, sir. Do you think doing a Masters of the Universe film properly is prohibitively expensive given the interest in the IP? If this movie gets made, I have a feeling that they will cheap out and it won't feel like an epic fantasy picture. Well, the first Masters of the Universe that Gary Goddard directed that came out in 1987, they had that very problem. I actually thought that, because Richard Edlund worked on the effects, I thought some of the effects in the original Masters of the Universe are pretty impressive. Shot on 65 millimeter, the looks, the glimpses we had of Eternia were pretty cool. But yes, I think a Masters of the Universe movie is cost prohibitive. I absolutely think it is. I mean, apparently they're trying to make one now, but I also think one of the problems with a Masters of the Universe movie is, look, I've watched a few episodes of the He-Man cartoon, but I know a lot of people have nostalgia for it and they grew up with it, but even I was a little old. I did buy the first He-Man figures that were released because I thought I hadn't seen figures like that before, and I thought they were cool. Like the first 6, it was He-Man, Man-at-Arms, Beastman. Is it Beastman? She-Ra, right? Skeletor, and I want to say the flying guy. Those are the 6, I think. I bought all. I can't remember. See, I'm old. One foot in the grave. But I did buy those figures because I thought they were really cool. I thought they were really interesting figures. They looked great on the shelf altogether. This was before I'd seen the cartoon, but I did watch the few episodes of the cartoon. I hated it. I was like, this is garbage made for kids. It's a TV commercial. So, and I don't mean to offend all you people who grew up with He-Man. I did buy the figures, but I don't think that a movie version of He-Man, to make it good, because of the creatures and the land, and then you have to make it believable. You have to give it some kind of verisimilitude, and everyone's going to point to Lord of the Rings and want it to be like that. I don't even know if a Masters of the Universe movie can support that. When they made the G.I. Joe movies, the recent G.I. Joe movies, there's an element of cheese that's sort of inherent in them. I think they might have done better if they were taken a little bit more seriously. And made cool for modern audiences. But I mean, they were kind of cool, I guess. I just think it's tough to translate. And yes, I think it is, to make a Masters of the Universe movie that would compete in today's marketplace, you have to spend a lot of money. And I did read, there was a guy named Mark Prusevich, I think it's Mark Prusevich, who wrote a script called Gray Skull that I read a decade ago that I thought was really good, but it was hugely expensive. So I don't know if they're going to be able to, what they're going to do. I'm curious. I'll go see it. I hope it's good. I'd like to see a kick-ass Masters of the Universe movie. I think it'd be neat. Stub McShave says, I have t-shirts I can't wear anymore. For example, an Exorcist spoof called The Exhibitionist. It shows Marin from behind flashing the top window. Yeah, one of the things that we're going through with our social media evolution is with everybody being woke and so easily offended. Once body humor is no longer acceptable, and I think that's kind of sad. So I feel you, Stubble. I feel your pain. But I think you should wear it as an experiment. Why not wear that shirt one day? Go out into public, go shopping, go to the movies, do something and see what happens. See if anybody says anything to you about the shirt. I'd be curious. Be a good, interesting experience. Alexander Wilson says, your opinion on the Big Little Lies behind the scenes drama. Did this happen because they wanted to release a season as soon as possible? Okay, that's a really good question, Alexander Wilson. So now I have to do a little bit of research. But for those of you, I'm going to put it in a nutshell. For the second season of Big Little Lies, remember the first season was it's basically a soap opera that was based on a novel. And it did very, very well. And it was basically a story that has a beginning, a middle, and an end. And of course, you have people like Reese Witherspoon and Nicole Kidman who were spearheading this. They got in some heavyweight Hollywood talent. For season 2, they brought in Meryl Streep, who, by the way, is killing it. I think they should do a spin-off of her character where she just goes from town to town to town and fucks people up. I'd love to see that. But so what happened was they hired one director, like with the first season, to direct all of the episodes. And hang on, I'm going to call this up because I want to get this correct. All the names. And this is another entertainment news story that just broke. So hang on. Lies, season 2, controversy. Let's see. Calling it up. Yes. Okay. So what happened is, okay, now I got the names. There's been some reported on, it just dropped, that Andrea Arnold, who directed Big Little Lies, has been sidelined. She started editing back home in London, and they basically got rid of her. They took her out of the edit bay, and she wrapped season 2, and she basically the director of season 1, Jean-Marc Vallée, came in to edit and make season 2 more like his season 1. So she was sidelined, and this is after, of course, Andrea Arnold was assured that she would have complete creative control over season 2. And as a result of her being replaced, they did a whopping 17 days, which is quite a lot for television. Most hour-long dramas are shot in 8 days. So doing 17 days is the equivalent of shooting 2 full-on episodes. I mean, an HBO drama takes more time, but it's still a lot of days to reshoot. And a lot of people have been criticizing this. There's a scene where Reese Witherspoon was supposed to throw an ice cream cone at Meryl Streep. We see her eating the ice cream cone, but in the finished episode, we don't see the ice cream cone actually get thrown. Reportedly, also, Valley also added more flashbacks to season 1. So what happened was a director who directed the entire show was replaced, and she did not get to see her vision all the way through to the end. And the producers brought back their award-winning director, Jean-Marc Vallée, to finish off the show. So what Alexander is asking me about is, how do I feel about this? Well, television and an HBO series, I consider television, is different than movies. Movies are really, if they work well, the director is considered the auteur. And I do believe in the auteur theory, because all the decisions and everything that happens on a movie is filtered through the director for a vision. You have to have a singular vision on all these things. Otherwise, it turns into a mess, as we saw with Hellboy. Television is different. Television is a writer-producer's medium. David Kelly, one of the most powerful television producers who's ever lived, controls that show, created Big Little Lies, and basically controls it. He's one of the most powerful television producers who's ever lived. So if he wasn't happy with something, frequently a director, what will happen is they will turn in their cut of whatever they've done and leave. And then the producers will finish the film. They'll make any editorial adjustments. They'll oversee the sound mix. I had an interesting experience when I was directing HBO Cinemax's Femme Fatales. I was able to edit my own episodes, which was very, very rare. And it was a really interesting opportunity because it helped me finish my episodes on time and on budget because I knew what I needed. And we had a very compressed production schedule. We shot those in 3 days, and I was given the mandate, you have 12 hours, no more. And basically, for the most part, when my producers didn't let me down to certain extents on the production, I was able to finish. I killed my first episode and did it in 12 hours. But and I was lucky to edit mine, so my vision was brought to the screen. But it is not unusual for directors to be dismissed and then the producers go in and rework their material. So it's not as dire as people think, and it's certainly not as unusual as it was made out to be in this article, especially because you have the female characters, the Reese Witherspoon and Nicole Kidman can exact their power. But the thing is, even they know to defer to the showrunner, which is David Kelly. And I'm sure that decision starts at the top. And they brought in their award-winning director who brought them the much lauded and Emmy-nominated and Emmy-winning series to make it more like the first season, because that's what people would expect. So unfortunately, while it's a bummer for Andrea Arnold, and I understand how painful that can be when somebody comes in and compromises your vision, she shouldn't have been given those assurances. The real problem that I see is that she was told one thing and then something else came to pass. And that's never a good thing. That's never right. You don't want to see that kind of, first of all, why hire her? I would think that there would have been more due diligence at the hiring phase to see, and you should discuss, especially if a director is directing all the episodes of a season, you really need to be on the same page with your producers. So in a way, I would blame, in this case, why this controversy erupted. As with all television, you give the writer producers, or the showrunner, as we call it, you give them credit for when something succeeds, and then you have to give them credit for this controversy. So I think it's the blame squarely lies, unfortunately, with David Kelly on this one. And how it was handled was poor. They saw her dailies. It's not like these things happen in a vacuum. They're looking at dailies every single day. They knew what was up. So I think that they should have this kind of communications breakdown. In this case, on a TV show, it's always the producer's fault. It really is. Anyway, Wade O'Neill says that, good question, by the way, Alexander. Wade O'Neill says Cinemassacre has great top 20 horror lists for different eras. The Bronze Age is the 70s and 80s. The Silver Age is the 50s and 60s. And the Golden Age is the 30s and 40s. I love that. I think that's great. I love Cinemassacre. As those of you know, I'm glad Cinemassacre is going. We talked about this before, about their Godzilla-thon. Destroyer! You have to watch their review of Godzilla versus Destroyer. You have to watch it because it just makes me crack up every time. I just love saying it the way he does. So I'm a big fan of the Cinemassacre channel. Go see what they've done. I didn't realize that they were still around, but I did watch every one of their Godzilla-thon videos. I literally sat down one day. I want to say that, God, it was a long time ago. So Cinemassacre has been around for at least a decade on YouTube. But big fan of them. Big fan of those guys. And yeah, I am a fan. James M. writes in, says, the other day you made a comment about Star Trek Discovery, something to the effect of, why can't Star Trek Discovery be the best of the best, being the best like the original series in The Next Generation? I think I might have an explanation as to why. About 3 years ago, I went to a convention with stars from old TV shows and movies. One of the stars at the show was Kent McCord, who is probably most known for Adam 12, or to the Post-Geek Singularity community, Galactica 1980. I forget now where I heard him say this, and I'm paraphrasing here, but he said something to the effect of, I asked the studio about doing a kind of reboot, keeping the core idea of the original, 2 police officers just going on their normal patrol day or night. And the studio said, no, a show without essentially a bad cop to make it more real won't sell, and there would be nothing to bring them back for the next episode. This is why I think the Star Trek CBS Bad Robot will not give us the Trek we deserve. I have no inside information, just something I once heard at a show about 3 years ago. Thanks for reading, James M. Well, that's interesting, James M. I think the reason that we're getting the Star Trek that we have is there is something going on in our culture that I don't presume to understand, where expertise, excellence, all of those things are frowned upon. I think that now that with social media, everybody has a voice. We want to have inclusion of all peoples. That in our quest to be nice, to be woke, that the idea of people who excel, whether it's intellectually, whether in sports, whether physically, anybody who's at the top of their game is somehow not being fair to the rest of humanity. And or I don't. I mean, that's a theory that I have, that somehow anybody who's an expert, now everybody's an expert because they're on YouTube, just like I am talking to you right now. I'm an expert, right? Um, I don't think that's true. I think that age, wisdom, experience, and knowledge is something we should never shy away from. And I've been on a America's Got Talent clip hook, or what do you call it? I'm hooked on America's Got Talent clips on YouTube. And I like to watch compilations of golden buzzer clips. And I love watching people who are extraordinarily talented. And I know that I'm never going to be as extraordinarily talented as many of the people that appear on America's Got Talent. Probably all of the people that appear on America's Got Talent. I'm not remotely close to being talented like they are. Their talent does not make me feel bad, nor does it make me feel lesser of a person because I'm not as good as them. I think just the opposite. I love seeing tremendously talented people do tremendously talented things for the betterment of mankind. But for some reason, I think that in this day and age, we have to include these people in this I think fake or false notion that we need to give representation to all kinds of people. And I'm thinking to myself, well, that's good in theory, and I do appreciate the sentiment. But when you're on the edge of the final frontier, I don't want to see anybody but the best of the best. We have no time to practice woke or inclusion when you're dealing with the fate of the universe, because people that aren't the best of the best, look, I don't care what color anybody is. I don't care what gender anybody is. I don't care what people's religion is. I don't care what their sexuality is. I do not care. I like everybody. Or as Gunnery Sergeant, as the Gunnery Sergeant said, as Arlie Ermy said in Full Metal Jacket, you're all equally worthless to me. No, I think everybody should be given a shot. I believe in equal opportunity for everybody, but I certainly don't believe in equal outcome. And if somebody's supposed to be out there on the final frontier, I don't want anybody that's less than 100%. I mean, why would you do that? That was the whole point, is that you knew that they were the best of the best, so you could aspire to be them. They're the most highly evolved, the most intelligent, and the most capable people. And I don't like it when I'm watching people that aren't that on Star Trek, because I'm like, why are these people on the ship? They're a danger to the rest of the crew. Doesn't make sense to me. But I do think optimism about the future, or being optimistic about humanity, it has fallen from favor somehow. I mean, not everybody could be a Mercury 7 astronaut. Not everybody who's in the military, a flyer, a pilot, was going to be picked for those 7 spots. We wanted the best of the best, or the best people that we could get. And I think there's nothing wrong with that. Just like you want the best football players on the team, you want the best basketball players on the team. I mean, what's wrong with that? I mean, that's what I want to see out of Star Trek. I want to see excellence and greatness. I don't see that we have to be looking for anything else. That's one of my problems with Star Trek. I do not believe when people who are incompetent, or there was that one scene when they were descending to the planet to find, in the second season, I think it was the first episode, when the women on the bridge crew who were guiding them down to this planetary surface weren't sure if they were going to be able to get through. And indeed, that was the episode where the male officer, because he was showboating, got smashed by an asteroid. I didn't see that as male bashing so much as, why do they have an idiot who's showboating on an away mission like this? I thought it was ridiculous that they turned a Starfleet officer into a douche just to kill him. That was offensive, not because he was a man, but because he was an idiot. and he was incompetent. That's what I hated the most. Why are you showing me Starfleet officers that are incompetent? I hate it. I hate it. I don't believe it either. I don't believe Starfleet would have those people there. Factual opinion says, damn it, man, turn on the AC. If I turn on the AC, I can't, you can't hear me. It's loud. And that's the first thing you do when you're making a movie is turn on. I know I'm getting soaking wet in the heat here. That's why I'm drinking yes. CJ Dunn says, I know what. You'll see, CJ. Alexander Wilson says, didn't Enterprise retcon the Klingons' appearance and that it was them messing with eugenics and genetic manipulation? They did. That was a retcon, and that was in the 4th season of Enterprise. I don't know if I believe that so much. Read John Forn's The Final Reflection. I think that's a better idea. It's good. Willow Yang says, I don't want to be Klingonist, but they all look the same to me in the animated series. I can't tell the difference between Koloth and Kor. Probably because they use the same animation. They reuse animation a lot. Dan V900 says, this might be a good idea for another topic since it relates to the new Lion King film. I was wondering if you knew anything about Kimba the White Lion, where the original Lion King film ripped it off from. Yeah, I've been reading about that a lot. I saw Kimba the White Lion when I was a kid. I think as many people pointed out, as Craig Mazin pointed out on Twitter today, not Craig Mazin, it was Chris McQuarrie. It was Craig Mazin. That the Lion King is basically Hamlet in a way. So it is an old story. I think that, yeah, maybe it borrowed from Kimba the White Lion a lot. I think that controversy is well trodden. That ground is well trodden. But it, I could delve into that. It wouldn't be the first time that another culture's work is ripped off or translated. I don't know if any money was exchanged when the Magnificent Seven was inspired by the Seven Samurai, or when for a few dollars more and fistful of dollars were inspired by Yojimbo and Sanjuro, things like that. I don't know. It's been happening a lot. I don't approve of it, but yeah, it happens. Wade O'Neill says, would love to see Meryl Streep as an over-the-top MCU or Bond villain. She has enough awards. Time to have some fun. Loved Cate Blanchett as Hera, as Hela. She was Hela. I agree with you, man. I think I would Meryl Streep as a Bond villain. As long as they didn't do what they did to Julianne Moore in Kingsman, I think that could be great. I would love to see that. I think that could be absolutely fantastic. What a great idea you have there. Love it. David Galvez is here. He's a little off topic, but Marvels is amazing so far, Rob. The artwork is absolutely stunning. Thank you for the recommendation. David Galvez, what he is talking about is I recommended, I think on the show, that he read things like Marvels that Alex Ross and Kurt Busiek wrote and Alex Ross painted. It's one of the great places to start if you're a fan of the MCU to get you into comics. Read Marvels, because it's basically a man on the street take on the Marvel Universe, and it's just absolutely incredible. Amazing stuff. Have another letter, and this one comes from, wow, this is a long one. This one comes from Anthony Choice. Anthony Choice writes in, Robert, I get it. Oh my God, do I get it. The post-geek singularity and how you got to that conceptual conclusion. And wow, is it an accurate description of this, our present moment. I wrote to you before, but now I kind of wish I hadn't. Not because I regret anything I imparted. I just would have written something else first. I would have written and rewritten multiple times what you're reading now. Originally, it was a rather lengthy journey down nostalgia road, but as I sat eating dinner, I thought about it differently. So what is the subject of my letter? It's Free Enterprise. That's the movie I directed. I tracked it down and just watched the extended version. I loved it. Part of me wishes I had seen it when it came out initially. It would have been taken totally differently by me, because at the time I could have fit into the movie. It resonated with my life in the early and mid 90s startlingly well. Having now seen it, the concept of the post-geek singularity resonates that much more accurately and reminds me of another mid-noughts film, the documentary Triumph of the Nerds, and its related thematic premise. Tech took hold, creating its own post-nerd singularity. So much so, everyone carries a personal computer in their pockets and call it a phone. And now it's the geek's turn. So yes, I get it. Free enterprise in that regard is this wonderful artifact of the era and of a particular lifestyle I was also peripherally a part of, and has special resonance now that geeks rule the box office and the director's chair. Back then as now, I lived in the heart of Silicon Valley, walking distance from Apple HQ. It's basically the end of the block. For me, there was always this overlap and intersect between geekdom and nerddom, for lack of a better term. Big tech and the multifaceted world of the creatives are intrinsically linked in my DNA. Some great memories and formative moments of mine are tied to that period because that was when I was in film school, in the same program of once peers, now strangers, Len Weissman and Yonan Vasquez, for whom I can say I knew them when, particularly Yonan. Though saying we were more than acquaintances would be a stretch, his close friend was my film school co-conspirator. Our intimate little film program had by then officially begun to regularly produce Hollywood industry and tech crossover professionals for at least a decade or more. It was a boutique program, an island, if you will, that was hidden away in the basement of the office building that doubled as the college's computer department. Really, our film school was just an incubator, on par with a similar and competitive program that produced Robert Rodriguez, a then contemporary hero of mine. I hung on to that entire do-it-yourself-ish generation of Smith, Tarantino, Rodriguez, and Boyle. In retrospect, like many others, spent many an hour writing and rewriting my far too Tarantino-esque original feature and on a spec adaptation of something, and mine something was Roger Zelazny's 9 Princes in Amber, simply titled Amber. That's awesome, by the way. I'd love to read that, actually. Though the potential retro 70s porno irony of such a name wasn't lost on me. I could elaborate further on that time in my life, perhaps in person someday. I just wanted to paint a corresponding picture. As I sat there at dinner, I realized there was a deeper reason I loved Free Enterprise beyond its fan service, snapshot nostalgia, and insider pop and industry referencing wit, and pitch-perfect characterization of every archetype I knew from film school now turned Hollywood. My life, unknown to most of my classmates then, was far, far afield of our basement imagination factory. So congruent to my geek escapism was a tempered and by far too real dark cynicism depicted in films like Boys in the Hood, or more accurately, Blood In, Blood Out. Dude, I love Taylor Hackford's Blood In, Blood Out. I have the DVD. Where is that Blu-ray? The Hood film was my life, even if sci-fi, horror, action, and indie were my flavor. At that time, this predicated a certain perspective that I held, obviously, but I had this dawning moment only a couple of hours ago wherein I realized the other thing that was so encapsulated by and endearingly portrayed in Free Enterprise, which was the levity and optimism of the pre-9/11 world. Wow, that's interesting. I never heard that before. My life shifted away from seeing film and screenwriting as a profession toward what amounts to now a 20-plus career as a professional activist, to which every other one of my labors was a subservient and part-time joint. When you're in it, breathe it. It's hard to see how our personalities get reshaped by it. So seeing your film sparked this memory of a more innocent time, not just for me, but for America at large, but one wherein I was still pontificating ad nauseum about the making and shaping of the American imagination through cinema. I never lost my love of the craft, nor did I ever stop writing. I instead just shelved it all for a time. I could continue on in complimentary fashion, chide you for your heartbreak-inducing criminal behavior and sacrificing the first appearance of Gambit to the altar of the gods for the sake of a scene. But nay, those backgrounds, whys and wheres and wherefores are for another. Nay, this is not lesson time. It's question time, Rob. Though you obviously look back on your own film with far more care and depth than any of us can, how do you feel, or do you feel, that moment of 90s Americana for the geek sphere and your profession is repeatable? Can indie come back for the mass audience? Can indie, meaning indie, oh wait, I think your indie film. Can indie come back for the mass audience, or is it doomed into the white noise of too many millions of streams and streaming? Has Hollywood's latest reinvention of itself become little more than an up-jumped B-movie factory, long on spectacle and short on substance? Can big budgets, higher production values, global releases, and the constant recasting from the same small pool of hot crop actors compensate for the fact there seems to be a whole lot of cookie cutter concepts, writing by committee, and out cheese making it to the screen? My own psychoanalysis is that it goes beyond the numbers and the metrics and actually is indicative of a much broader and fundamentally shallow national cynicism about the state of the world and the nation, and Hollywood's own creative bankruptcy. Thus, the easy way, the rehash and reboot and franchise assembly line of filmmaking, is the new norm, or is, as Roger Daltrey espoused, the new boss or impulse, the same as the old boss. Has Hollywood and cinema shifted on its moorings at the deepest level? Has Hollywood simply become a better funded, incestuous gaggle of hacks commanded by corporate shills turned hawk artists and hucksters for what may amount to be a tidal wave of schlock that may last decades? In solidarity, Antoine. To be continued in another letter on another topic. Well, this Anthony Choice, who wrote this, this is a fantastic letter, and the question that Anthony is posing is the question that I grapple with every single day, and I know that a lot of my filmmaking friends grapple with it every single day, and really, I can speak to it. First of all, he asks a number of very good and very, very important. This is a very great letter, by the way. I love this letter, and I love, no one ever asked me what my favorite color is, which I love. This is why I love you guys, the Post-Geek Singularity community. And first off, I want to say to Anthony, part of the reason that I wanted to do these chats, more so than anything else, was also to make sure that my geeky enthusiasm and exuberance as I move into middle and indeed old age remains. It's very easy to get deeply cynical about the work that you're doing. And while I'm lucky, Skyfighter, it's Lucas Kendall, who's, by the way, his birthday is today. He's 45 years old. The writer, director, the visionary behind Skyfighter, the Skyfighter project, he crowdfunded this movie, and we finished it. It's debuting on July 24th. The reason that I like working with people like Lucas is he too had a whole career that he's trying to shift and become a filmmaker now. This is the first thing he directed. He did a phenomenal job. He's a born director. He's very, very smart. He's a great writer. And I think he did a great job with this short, and we're going to turn the short into a feature, and I'm convinced it's going to happen. But one of the things I like working with my friends, I thought, and Free Enterprise was an example of, I thought that I was going to be surrounded, and indeed I still am, but at the time I had all these talented friends of mine, and I thought, naively, I thought, maybe in hindsight, that we were all going to work together and continue to make cool stuff. Now, interestingly enough, I have worked with my friends on an individual basis, making things like, for instance, Darren Doctorman, who appears in Free Enterprise. He's done some work. He did some visual effects work on Tango Shalom, some composites, and he's doing some titling work. And we'd never worked on a project together other than when he appeared in his cameo in Free Enterprise. But it's great. Mark Altman hired me to direct 5 episodes of Femme Fatale. So I've worked with friends through the years, and that has been great. But yes, I think that social media has given rise, and over the last 20 years, I've seen this. There's a casual, snarky cynicism about everything. And I think that if you wanted to go to the moon today, I used to think that the only people that would poo-poo things were like French intellectuals that would be like, why do you want to go to the moon? We could sit here and discuss Proust as we sip wine and smoke our cigarettes. But now I think there's a deep cynicism about anybody who is excellent and ideas or things that anybody who wants to accomplish something, anybody who dreams big, everyone is so quick to tear them down. Anybody who you say, Anthony, that you're working in activism. there's a place that has been discredited, and there's a lot of people coming back to activism now, but it's almost like, why bother? And I think activists are what changed the world. And to be an activist, you have to have an inherent optimism that you can change the world. But there's been a deep cynicism that I've seen arise over the last 20 years. And it part of what I wanted to do with the Post-Geek Singularity community and talk and do these chats was to be like-minded with people that are excited about things. I mean, it's interesting when you go back and you watch America's Got Talent clips, especially if you watch just the Golden Buzzer clip shows, you watch Simon give somebody the golden buzzer. It's like a 3-minute adrenaline hit of joy when you watch an incredibly talented person do something incredibly talented on stage, and that gets the golden buzzer. It's like an immediate, adrenaline shot of joy directly into your soul. And as I've been watching, you fall down that rabbit hole and you just watch clips on YouTube, because I watch a lot of YouTube clips and I just zip around and watch. I like these America's Got Talent clips. They just make you feel good. And I think everybody is still striving for that. And if nothing else, Free Enterprise is about two fairly unlikable guys, one of them based on me, one of them based on my co-collaborator, Mark Altman, whose new show Pandora starts this week, although some of the reviews have been, I think, unnecessarily harsh. I haven't seen the show. It was supposed to be a film about joy and about the love of all of this stuff, that despite our shortcomings as people, all of us in the movie that were depicted shared a love of all of this material. And I certainly have clung to that. I mean, one of the things I was not aware of about these chats when I started was that people responded to, I guess, my positivity. But anybody who's watched this show for any length of time knows that my positivity is genuine. I really love this stuff, and I have my whole life. And luckily, I've transitioned with all these slings and arrows that I've taken in my career in Hollywood, and take to this day. I mean, getting involved in lawsuits with people I did good work for, who talk about loyalty, until they want to turn on you. You know, it's really interesting to do that, and I've dealt with that a lot. And most recently with my the former guy that I did a lot of good work with, Alec Peters, who doesn't know how to actually do the work and make movies himself, so he gets frustrated and goes after the people that do. And I've dealt with those kind of people my whole life. And even despite having those kinds of people in my life, what I continue to try and do is work and do things like work on Skyfighter or work on Tango Shalom. But your question about where are we at as a culture? How did you put it? So as you say, your own psychoanalysis is that it goes beyond the numbers and the metrics and actually is indicative of a much broader and fundamentally shallow national cynicism about the state of the world and the nation. 100% agree. You know, I don't think now America would have been capable of going to the moon collectively, because our government would be bickering about it. I mean, we had a president that stood up there and said, we choose to go to the moon in this decade, not because it is easy, but because it is hard. What is coming up this week, people? What is coming up on the 20th of July? I'll tell you. It's the 50th anniversary of the moon landing. And yes, we went to the moon. And yes, it was politically motivated. We had to beat the Russians. So ultimately, it was about politics. But it was also the people that worked on the moon landing were not thinking, well, they were thinking we had to beat the Russians, but they wanted to do it. Everybody that worked on getting the Apollo missions to the moon, everyone that worked represented the very best of America. And we had a president that stood up there. We choose to go to the moon in this decade and do the other things, not because it is easy, but because it is hard. That, my friends, is the kind of optimism that we no longer have in this country. We certainly don't have it from our leadership. Partisan bickering. We've got, concentration camps, if you want to call it that, on our southern border. You know what's funny? Here's what I don't understand. If you have people that are fleeing violence and poverty and bringing their kids with them across, say, 1,200 miles, or they're walking from Central America where they have gang-ridden towns, and they want a better life. If they've walked 1,200 or 1,400 or even 2,000 miles to get here, aren't those the kind of people that we want in this country? I don't know. Just a thought. Sure, Do we want our open borders? No. I don't think we should have open borders because we want people who are coming into this country, we want them to be counted. We want to make sure they're healthy, that they're not bringing in some virulent strain of Ebola or whatever. So yes, we have to process those people just like anybody was processed when they came through Ellis Island. But man, I would want people in this country that have walked that far. But I also want them to pay taxes. I want them to pay their part of living in our great country. That's part of what's going on. But you go on. You say, thus the easy way, the rehash and the reboot and the franchise assembly line of filmmaking is the new norm. Here's the problem with filmmaking. And it goes back to the original topic of the chat of the beginning of this discussion. Movie making at the theatrical level is all about spectacle. Low budget indie movies, very few break through and become moneymakers because nowadays, let's say somebody's made a killer $2 million movie or less. In order to put a $2 million movie in the theaters to make it even viable, to get anybody to even, first of all, know it's there, and two, know that it's opening on a certain day, you're going to have to spend 10 times that, 10 or $20 million in marketing to have that independent movie make a dent at the box office because people's viewing habits have changed. In the independent explosion, and I look at Steven Soderbergh's Sex, Lies, and Videotape in the late 80s to be sort of ground zero of the indie explosion that gave birth to Quentin Tarantino, that gave birth, well, Soderbergh, Quentin Tarantino, Robert Rodriguez, of course, Kevin Smith. A lot of the people that made they came out, and I was definitely Doug Liman, who made Swingers. I was definitely inspired by them when we made Free Enterprise in 1998. Look, I really thought when I made Free Enterprise that I'd work for 10 years to make a movie. And I thought I was working with collaborators and that we were all going to continue to make movies. And unfortunately, that's not how it turned out. And when Free Enterprise was released, they put it out in 9 theaters in Los Angeles when it opened. The company that put it out, it was their first acquisition. And when they put it out in theaters, they did not advertise it. So nobody knew it was there. So even though we'd won festival awards and I'd literally traveled around the world with Free Enterprise, my career as a filmmaker was dead at 6 p.m. the night the movie was released on June 4th, 1999, because nobody went and saw it. And no one went and saw it because they didn't know it was there. If I had the internet now with the audience that I could muster, I could be that trailer for Free Enterprise with Shatner in it, it would have gone viral. I would have had a huge career probably. Or maybe I'm just uniquely untalented. Who's to say? I've only directed one movie. But it was a different world. And I think pre 9/11, I certainly didn't have to work at hanging on to my youthful exuberance and my enthusiasm and my passion. My passion is still here, but over the last 20 years, I've become very jaded. I've had some very, very significant career ups and downs. But the problem is, well, it's not really a problem. I had a lot of fun. So when my filmmaking career didn't work out, the DVD world called. And I fell into making special features, and I worked on Lord of the Rings, and I worked on the X-Men, and I worked on Chronicles of Narnia, all the way up through Star Trek: The Next Generation. So I really made a good living for a while in this new industry that has now subsequently died. It was an industry that grew and flourished, and like a rose, eventually it gets either picked or it just gets old on the vine. It was very fast. It was a new... Making special features was a new thing. And then I got into it and I got to travel around the world and live in foreign countries. And during that time, I also got to produce like the Agent Cody Banks movies, or I got to go to Bulgaria and produce The Hills Run Red with my good buddy, Dave Parker. So I was able to have a career, and I still have a career. I produced Tango Shalom. I'm editing Tango Shalom. Now I'm overseeing the final bits of post-production. So I've stayed at it, and I've kept my passion alive, and I've kept my desire to do more, not because it is easy, but because it is hard. But I do think that independent movie making is no longer viable, unfortunately, at the cinema the way it was in the 90s. You could make a breakthrough indie film and a movie like, say, a Pulp Fiction. I mean, think about it now. Quentin Tarantino had made Reservoir Dogs for less than $2 million. His second movie was Pulp Fiction. It broke out, became a big hit, and Quentin Tarantino became Quentin Tarantino. Bryan Singer, my buddy Bryan Singer, his second movie was Usual Suspects. His first movie won Sundance, but no one saw it because it didn't get a release. And then his second movie was Usual Suspects, and it won 2 Academy Awards. So the days of independent filmmaking being theatrically viable, it's far more difficult now than it was. And I think you nailed it. The new boss is the old boss. The problem is movie making now. The amount of money that you're, first of all, putting on the line, could be hundreds of millions of dollars, is bigger than it's ever been. I mean, back in the early 90s when Terminator 2 was being made, people were like, oh my God, it's going to cost $100 million. I mean, now it's like, yeah, Avengers Endgame was $350 million, or at least that's what the reported cost is. So movie making has changed. One of the things I would be curious to talk to you about in terms of activism is, on one hand, you have social media, which is one of the greatest communications tools. We are in, I would call it our terrible twos. If you look at the evolution of social media, which is probably going to take another century, assuming we don't all perish from global warming or an asteroid strike or nuclear apocalypse, whatever, or a virulent pandemic, whatever. Assuming we're here, we're going to look back at the last 10 years of social media as our terrible twos, I think. But the one thing, as an activist, look at what social media has done for activism. Look at how many people you can muster and get the word out. And so I look at all these things as you have to take the good with the bad. And I think right now we are all in a transitional period, but I think for the most part, even though human beings have visited horrible things on one another, and no one is better at harming other human beings than we are. Our track record, especially during the 20th century, not so good. But our life expectancy is longer. There's more inclusion and there's more representation for people who have been marginalized throughout the centuries than there ever was. We have a long way to go. But again, we're in an evolutionary phase, and social media has certainly changed the fabric of human culture. And I think for the better, ultimately. We just have to get over to the fact that we've all been infantilized and turned into babies because of social media. But that too will change. But I do think right now Hollywood is unfortunately, movies have become a spectacle. Everything is a thrill ride, an amusement park ride, and so much money is at stake. I mean, now we look at a Spider-Man movie. If it doesn't gross up $1 billion, it's somehow a failure. I mean, that's just the most absurd shit I've ever heard of in my life. In 2000, if you told me that we would be getting a big budget Spider-Man movie, I would be like, well, unless James Cameron gets back to doing that, we're never going to see a big budget Spider-Man movie. And here we are, just a little shy of 20 years later, and look what we've had. Look what's come down the pike. Look at the Marvel Cinematic Universe that began in 2008, and here we are in 2019. You had the 23rd movie in the Infinity Saga that rounds out the Infinity Saga. Who would have ever thought, even Kevin Feige and Marvel, in their wildest imaginings, probably never thought we'd be at 23 MCU movies here in the summer of 2019. So I am optimistic ultimately about what's coming down the pike. I am. I do. But I also understand that, same as it ever was, like you say, the new boss is the old boss, or Roger Daltrey. I'm a big Who fan, actually. Roger Daltrey is the lead singer of the Who, for those of you who don't know. I hope everybody out here knows the Who. Ever since I was a young boy, I played the silver ball from Soho down to Brighton. I must have played them all. Which, by the way, they showed Elton John sing in Rocket Man. You get a brief bit of that. I still dream of one day directing a movie, and I hope to be directing a movie soon. I've got many irons in the fire. I'm working with many different people. There's a lot of good things coming down the pike. And I think there's a lot of opportunity with streaming services to create content that we haven't seen before. But yes, it's always going to be kind of an incestuous gaggle of hacks commanded by corporate shills. And they turn hawk artists and hucksters. But you know what? That's your job. Your job now as an artist or as a filmmaker is to navigate these waters and hopefully put out something. You get to be an Ari Aster who makes Hereditary and gets to make Midsummer. Or you get to make The Witch and the new film Lighthouse. There's still ways to succeed in this business as independent filmmakers. I think it's a little more difficult theatrically. And There is a cool factor, and I think the real problem is that we're dealing with a lot of people that know less than they knew. You're dealing with executives and people that in the business that know less than they did 25 years ago. Because of that, because of social media, because of everybody is so cynical and jaded, and everybody thinks they know everything now. But it is different. But I do think a tidal wave of schlock that may last decades. Listen, I don't think the Marvel Cinematic Universe is a tidal wave of schlock. I think it's an astonishing achievement in genre cinema, and I'm happy to have been alive to see the MCU grow and flourish, especially because I never thought I would see comic book characters handled with such grace and respect the way it has been. I never thought that I would be excited to see the 25th James Bond movie. I'm surprised the Bond franchise has survived. I'm, of course, sad about where Star Trek has gone. Star Trek has gone, to me, it's a perfect example of how America has gone wrong, unfortunately. But I also hope that eventually cooler heads will prevail. There's only so much money you can spend and throw at Star Trek before. Oh, look, Dayton Ward just announced on social media. Dayton Ward, who's a very good Star Trek novelist who I've been reading for years, is now going to be consulting on the entire Star Trek brand. That's somebody who should be. He's somebody who knows. He's somebody who's put in Star Trek projects and got them made. He's coordinated between different authors to keep their book stories straight. So there's always good stuff happening. There always is. Man, I've gone on a lot. I don't even know what I'm saying, but I want to thank you for sending this letter in, Anthony, because it was great. It's a really great letter. And again, that's why I love you members of this, the Post-Geek Singularity community, because you guys write me great letters. This one is from a longtime writer and viewer, Dan Skip Allen. He writes in a lot. I like his letters. Hey, Rob, I wanted to write to talk to you about what you said on Friday's show about things we ingest, whether it be food or TV shows, movies, or music. If we watch it, listen to it, eat, or drink it, we ingest it in one form or another. A couple of weeks ago, I made some food and I didn't prepare it properly and ate it or ingested it, and I got food poisoning. This was entirely my fault. I should have thought better how I cooked the food before I ate it, so I have no one to blame but myself. When I was sitting on the toilet for HR hours and everything in my system came flowing out of my body, I couldn't keep anything down for 4 or 5 days, and this leads me to I don't know what you wrote here, but watching media. When we choose to watch TV shows, movies, or listen to music, it is our choice. There is no one forcing us to watch or listen to these things. We are doing it out of our own volition. For example, I held off for a while on seeing Child's Play because I was a fan of the original series of films. I saw the first one. It was okay for the time it came out. I went into this new one very skeptical. Of course, it was really bad and didn't make any sense. The acting was bad as well. Mark Hamill couldn't save it as the voice of Chucky either. Whose fault was this? My own fault. I went and watched it or ingested it. I have no one to blame for myself for not liking it. The whole Star Trek and Star Wars fans, myself included, have themselves to blame. They keep ingesting it over and over again. If you don't like it, why do you keep watching it? It's like if I ate Boston baked beans. I don't like them at all. Why would I keep eating something I hate? The same goes for rap music. I can't stand rap music. I wouldn't listen to rap music over and over again because I don't like it. My advice is don't watch things you don't like, and your life will be happier, in my humble opinion. Thanks again. Talk to you later. Dan Skip Allen. Well, first of all, I want to say that there is some great rap out there. Eric B. and Rakim. I've talked about Eric B. and Rakim on the show. The Wu-Tang Clan, NWA. I mean, there's some pretty great hip hop. One of the things you should watch, and a lot of people will jump on me, especially people who love hip hop. I really like the Get Down, Baz Luhrmann show, The Get Down on Netflix, just because it talked about DJ Herc and the beginnings of the hip hop movement in New York. I have a lot of respect for hip hop music and hip hop artists who really know what they're doing. So, yeah, check it out. But I think you're right. Look, I was half jesting when I said that, hey, we have the USDA and the U.S. Department of Agriculture, and that we should have a version of that for our imaginative pursuits. And people are like, what? You want government regulation? No, I was sort of jesting that we have some kind of a group, but it would be nice if there was sort of a Star Trek advisory group made of longtime fans who really understood the franchise, that were vetted by the franchise owners who could look, I was one of them once. I was actually hired by Viacom as a Star Trek consultant for a year back in the mid-90s. I wrote reports. I was given things to read and look over and write reports as to whether or not it was good Star Trek. They paid me to do it. And I had that job. So I was officially a Star Trek consultant at one point in my life. So it's funny, I always forget that, but I got to go on the Paramount lot, and be a Star Trek consultant. It was a lot of fun. So I agree. We have no one to blame but ourselves. We choose to ingest things, and it's a bummer. But I would say that I'm never going to not watch a Star Wars movie, and I'm never going to not watch an episode of Star Trek. Just make them better. Make them better, people. Make them better. That's all I ask. Because we can do better. We can always do better. We can do that and other things in this decade, not because it is easy, but because it is hard. Let's see. Dieter Bastian's here, all the way from Germany. Rob, I'm Ghibli with delight. Endgame Iron Man hot toy comes with the Nano Gauntlet. Box office race between Avatar and Endgame couldn't be any closer. Well, Dieter Bastian, yes, you are correct. The Iron Man hot toy from Endgame does come with the Nano Gauntlet. And I wasn't going to buy another Iron Man figure. I don't know if I'm going to buy that just to get that Nano Gauntlet, but it is pretty cool. And the Avatar, I don't know if Avatar is going to catch Endgame. It has a long way to go, even though it's a short way to go. It's a long way after a movie's been out that far. CJ Dunn says, the subtlety has me curious as AF. I cannot wait to see. Well, you'll be able to see, CJ, I promise. I have a secret, and you'll see it. Anthony Gonzalez says, every summer I have to watch The Lost Boys. I love it still, and I still believe. Yeah, can you believe they're making a Lost Boys TV pilot? That the creator of my beloved Veronica Mars, which is coming back on Hulu, they looked at the first pilot and they scrapped it, and they're redoing it, but they're doing a second Lost Boys TV pilot, not unlike what happened to Star Trek, which is pretty amazing. And I still believe, and my sister is still crying. Well, I won't sing it, but you guys all know the song. JB Bonifacio is here and says, I don't put Stranger Things on the level of Breaking Bad or Battlestar Galactica, but there's still merit to the fact that it's the show I watched the fastest. JB, I will agree with you. I do not think that Stranger Things is by any stretch of the imagination of Breaking Bad or Battlestar Galactica, but it doesn't want to be. I do think that what Stranger Things does, it does it pretty damn well. It knows what it is, and I thought season 3 did a fine job. And you're right, I whipped through Stranger Things 3. Really enjoy the show. I couldn't agree with you more. But that's the thing. I think that the makers of Stranger Things know what they wanted to make, and they succeeded in doing so. And I think that's admirable. I want more of that. Stubble McShave says, I'd like to see Angel Maker turned into a film. It's a team-up story of a mobster's son who repair clocks and a 90-year-old female former super spy. Bring it on. But they would turn that into a CBS procedural. But I'd watch the heck out of that. That sounds great. Bring it on. Stubble McShave also says, is that a book? I guess it is a book, right? Or is it a comic? I'm unaware of the source material, but I'm in. Count me in. Stubble McShave says, do you think The Lion King is a spreadsheet film? Well, not to the people who made it. I don't think that the very incredibly talented artisans and effects artists, and certainly Jon Favreau, the director, who spent 3 years of his life making this movie. You know what? I hate it when people say, oh, they took the movie just because of the paycheck. It's not ever just because of the paycheck. Because you got to put your heart and soul. There's too much work involved in making a movie. You can never just phone it in. You really can't. So I don't think that The Lion King is a spreadsheet film for the people that made it. But certainly at Disney, the bean counters like, oh, well, once Cinderella proved that there could be a return for these movies, absolutely do they become spreadsheet movies. They want to make money. Lion King is probably their most famous animated film. It's been turned into a very successful Broadway show. Absolutely went right to the top of that spreadsheet on which movies should we adapt or turn into, in the case of Lion King, photorealistic to make some great money. I think that I think that it was a spreadsheet movie, but I don't think the people working on them ever think of them that way. Terry Flynn says, moderator Terry Flynn says, thanks for renewing my moderator status. Jim and I have dealt with some serious crap today. Really? I'm glad. Detective Jim and Terry from the UK do not put up with any guff. They do not suffer fools gladly. That is why they are administrators. And I'm going to be there. I'm going to be there on that day in April of next year when Detective Jim, passport in hand, we are going to take the train from Heathrow Airport into a London train station. I'm going to step out of that train station with Detective Jim because we'll have to like team up and meet in New York to get our, even though there's a direct flight. Detective Jim lives in a place where he's going to have to fly either one way or another. But we're going to join Detective Jim. But I want to be there and watch his eyes wide open, look in wide wonder at London train stations are really marvelous. And there's nothing better than taking the train from Heathrow and getting into the center of London and getting out. And I'm going to have Terry be there. And Terry's going to meet Detective Jim. And it's going to be live. I'm going to live stream it right on Robservations. You're going to see it when Detective Jim and Terry meet for the first time. And I'm going to meet Terry too for the first time. It's going to be fun. There will be no moderators on that chat, so God knows what's going to happen. But it's going to be great. So Terry, I want to thank you. I want to thank all my moderators, Greg, Mike Bodden, who's also on a train right now, traveling from where he lives in Iowa. He's coming to San Diego for Comic-Con this week. We're all going to be hanging out. And he's going to the Grand Canyon with his wife first. So that's where Mike is. And then, of course, Greg Smith's up in Seattle. Well, in Olympia. But Terry, thanks for you and Jim weathering that storm. Because, you know, it's so weird to me. It's like, watch some shows, people. Why are dudes scared of God, or why are dudes scared of girls these days? I don't understand. It's so weird. To speak to Anthony's letter, that's another weird thing that I don't get. Like, what's wrong with having, like, don't you? I watch Star Trek. I mean, growing up watching Star Trek, I love women. You know, bring on the female Romulan starship commander. If the Enterprise was taken over by a woman, and indeed it was once, why wouldn't you like that? I mean, I don't understand. So Terry, you're welcome. Sorry you had to deal with the shit today. Wade O'Neill says, impact of poorer attention spans on future films. Well, I think that's a problem. You know, there's movies that I own that I know that people under 25 probably, and this is, sure, there's always an exception. But I guarantee you, okay, let's pick a new movie, like the new version of the Criterion's Tree of Life that Terrence Malick made. I think it's actually a masterpiece. I think the new version of Tree of Life that they released, this new cut of it, total masterpiece. How many people will sit down and watch that? I think the attention span that people have is problematic. And a lot of my favorite films growing up, such as Andrei Tarkovsky movies like Stalker and Solaris, or my beloved Michelangelo Antonioni's Ennui trilogy, made up of La Ventura, La Notte, and The Eclipse. Would kids watch those movies today? I doubt it. I really do. I think it's problematic. I think people's attention spans are problematic. But you know what? I see short attention spans as when you have a computer, when you're carrying around a smartphone that is tailored to provide you only with information that you want, when you see information that doesn't interest you or you don't want, you just push it aside in your mind. And I think the short attention span is more a factor if people don't want to take in any information that they don't like or that doesn't make them feel good immediately. I think it's more of a like versus a dislike. They have to know what media they're getting. That people, it's not so much short attention span, it's no attention span for anything they don't want. But how do you, like, there were so many times I sat at the Seattle International Film Festival as a kid growing up, starting at 12, when I would end up watching a foreign film that was interminable to sit through. But I would get through it. I would watch it, and sometimes I would learn things, sometimes I would hate things, but I watched it. I would sit down and watch anything that was put in front of me and go, And that's how I learned about things I would never have known about otherwise. And I think it's sad now that sense of discovery, that people aren't going to stumble over things as much that could really affect them, that's kind of gone because everybody is being curated. They're getting curated material all the time. So I just saw a movie I never thought. When it happens, it's good, but I don't think it happens very much anymore. And when people are designing their own curriculum on a daily basis, on a 24/7, it's a bummer. And I think it's problematic, Wade. I think it is problematic. I think we have a real problem in this country. Yeah. Well, and Electric Barbarella. Yes, I'm a big fan of that. I'm a huge Duran Duran fan. Electric Barbarella did not come out It was not on one of Duran Duran's better albums, but I do like that song. Electric Barbarella 27 says, I'm having a heck of a time changing my Iron Man head to Tony on the Iron Man 2 Hot Toys figure. Any advice on getting that neck piece out? I try and use some kind of a lubricant that's not going to affect the plastic, something, whatever that might be. That's what I would do, but it's tough because you don't want to break it. But work the lubrication in. That might help out. Report back. Tell me what happened. Yeah, I mean, you could try using something like talcum powder. That's pretty harmless, but it's hard to get that in there because it's more granule. But yeah, just do it carefully. You don't want to break it. And if it's an Iron Man 2 figure, is it a new Iron Man 2 figure or is it an actual figure that came out for Iron Man 2? Because that's even more problematic. Just be careful. I'll tell you what. I'm going to jump ahead. Because this has been a long chat. As promised, I have a Willow Yang letter, and I'm going to end today's chat with a Willow Yang letter because I'm burning up too. That's right, people. Willow Yang has written to me, and it's a doozy. So without further ado, here is Willow Yang's review of The Trouble with Tribbles. Greetings, Rob. Continuing on with my Star Trek reviews, I'm sending over my report for The Trouble with Tribbles. The episode is special to me since it served as my first introduction to the original series. As the story goes, I was watching one of your numerous rants on Star Trek Discovery several months ago when you started going off about the Tribble that appeared in Lorca's room. Not understanding what the hell it was you were talking about, I searched Tribbles up on the internet, and the first image that popped up was Kirk being buried under a mountain of fur balls. That piqued my interest, and the rest is history. The Trouble with Tribbles is what I considered to be one of the lighter Star Trek episodes. It didn't necessarily have the deeper themes or allegories that headier episodes like Balance of Terror or A Taste of Armageddon had. Even as a non-Star Trek viewer, I was still able to fully appreciate the story. Now that I've had the opportunity to watch the series in order, however, I cannot help but find it a little ironic that the episode came out right after Wolf in the Fold, in which Scotty is accused of murdering multiple women. Personally, I believe that the episode order should have been switched around so that The Trouble with Tribbles came out first. After being revealed as a ruthless, triple-sidal maniac who callously joked about dooming millions of helpless little critters to a horrific death, the audience probably wouldn't have had any trouble believing Scotty to be a serial killer. Hashtag justice for Tribbles. The Trouble with Tribbles is frequently touted as one of the finest comedic episodes from the original series. What particularly stood out for me were the character interactions. The episode was filled with witty dialogue and banter between various different parties. Kirk and Nils Barris, Spock and Dr. McCoy, Scotty and the Klingons, Cyrano Jones and every person that he was trying to peddle his tribbles to. Chekhov provided some additional comedic lines as he continues on the running gag of crediting Russians with various achievements and innovations. I wish that he'd been present on the planet Omega so that he could credit the Russians for the development of communism. Or is that one invention that he doesn't want to claim credit for? Of course, there were also quite a bit of humor involving the ever-prolific Tribbles as they continuously multiply, culminating, of course, in the meme-launching scene of Kirk being buried under an avalanche of furballs that were propagating on poison Quattro Triticale. Hashtag justice for Tribbles. At this point, I'm convinced that Kirk must have superhuman powers. He has appeared impervious towards a multitude of enchantments throughout the series, including the irresistible cuteness of the Tribbles that not even Spock seemed to be immune towards. Not that he'd admit it, of course. It was very entertaining seeing Kirk acting as the role of sole curmudgeon on the Enterprise, ordering for the removal of the Tribbles, whilst the rest of the crew were preoccupied with caressing them. Personally, I'm inclined to side with Uhura on the matter. Tribbles bring love, and what's more important in life than love? Biologically, Tribbles are a very interesting species. They are apparently hermaphroditic and reproduce via self-fertilization. This trait isn't unusual. There are various species of plants, insects, fish, and lizards that have adopted similar forms of reproduction. I'm quite curious about their anatomy, however. Although Tribbles do possess the appearance of small mammalian creatures, most reminiscent of a rodent, They don't have an apparent head or sensory organs like eyes, ears, noses, or mouths. Tribbles don't possess any visible appendages either, even though I did see a few of them crawling around, albeit very slowly. And of course, there's the question of how their digestive systems work. If they do indeed produce and eliminate waste like regular animals, I'd imagine that the Enterprise must have gotten quite putrid from the excrement of millions of tribbles. Tribbles are a textbook example of an R-selected species, organisms that are defined by high reproductive rates, little to no parental care, and quick maturity. Such creatures are best adapted to harsh and unstable environments where predators, natural disasters, and sudden environmental changes will result in the deaths of many. Given the incredible fecundity of tribbles, I can only imagine what hardships they must face in their native environment that have caused them to evolve such impressive growth rates. Perhaps an army of Scottish engineers beaming them into passerby Klingon ships? Hashtag justice for tribbles. My favorite scene in The Trouble with Tribbles was the final confrontation toward the end, when all of the different characters were brought into the same room together. There were plenty of witty lines and zingers as various parties aired out their grievances toward each other. The funniest moment for me came when Kirk began using the tribbles as a biosensor, walking between the different characters and gauging how the creatures reacted to them. While I grok Spock, I have to vehemently disagree with his assessment of tribbles as having no practical use. In addition to providing love, tribbles are also an effective Klingon repellent and could probably have come in handy during the numerous confrontations that the crew would have with the latter race in subsequent episodes. Would Kang have tried hijacking the Enterprise in Day of the Dove if he found it swarming with shrieking tribbles? As Cyrano Jones pointed out, the Tribbles were clearly the true heroes of the story, having practically saved numerous lives by consuming the poisoned Quattro Triticale that would have otherwise gotten sent to Sherman's planet, exposing Darwin and driving off Koloth and the pompous Barris. I submit to you, they deserve better than getting slaughtered by Klingons. Hashtag justice for Tribbles. Yours sincerely, Willow. Who doesn't love these Willow Yang letters? I know I certainly love these Willow Yang letters, and they just keep getting better. Kudos to you, Willow, but that's only second season. When are you going to review Spock's brain? That should be an interesting one. You don't have to review Spock's brain. I think I've said that to you before. You really don't. David Goldstein says, Rob, what's the difference between Dolby Vision and HDR10? Well, basically the Dolby Laboratories seal of approval. To be honest, I don't know. I'm going to have to find that out. I don't know, to be honest. I vaguely know, but I don't know enough to answer that question. Now that's going to be the first thing I do when I get off of this chat, which is right now. First of all, I want to thank you, David, for, I'm going to get back to you since you've asked me this question. You sent it as a super chat. In tomorrow's chat, I'm going to answer your question first with an answer. I'm going to get an answer for you, a definitive answer, and an answer that allows me to answer this question extemporaneously off the top of my head, but I don't know the answer to it. And you should never be afraid to not know the answer to something. Then you can go find it out on your own. I'm looking forward to finding out the actual difference between HDR10 and Dolby Vision, because I don't know it. I'm not equipped for Dolby Vision here in this household, and I'm going to find out because I'm in the market for a 4K TV, although I really want that Panasonic OLED, but they don't sell it in the United States. It's very expensive, and I can't afford it. That's a lot of super chats that I'll never get. Anyway, I want to thank everybody. This is a barn burner of a chat, almost 2 hours long. Thank you for all participating, all you members of the Post-Geek Singularity community. Once again, thanks to the moderators, especially Terry and Jim, who are here today. Sorry for dealing with the crap probably about James Bond, but you called it, Terry. You knew this was going to happen. So thanks for being a moderator. I want to thank Lucky Tiger for continuing to sponsor the Burnettwork and Robservations. Go to getluckytiger.com if you're a man who wants to look good and feel great. And if you check out, you can use PGS for Post-Geek Singularity to get 20% off your order. And I want to say, remember, every person you meet has a story to tell you have yet to hear. So all you have to do is listen. And with that, everybody, I'm going to bring this chat to an end. Please like, please comment, please subscribe. It helps the YouTube analytics, keeps the channel going, which I know you all want. Anyway, I will talk with you later. And as always, have a better day.